Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Sheffrer, and I'm the president of the Democratic Women's Club of Greater Broward. And this afternoon, I'm here talking with Joe Kimok. He's one of the candidates for the state attorney of Broward County, and he calls himself the progressive candidate for state attorney. So I'm going to let him introduce himself, and we're going to talk about a lot of things today. So let's just tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that made you decide that you wanted to run for this position.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Joe Kimok. I am a major crimes attorney with the Office of Criminal Conflict and Civil Regional Counsel, which means I represent folks who are charged with crimes who can't afford a lawyer. I represent folks charged with everything from misdemeanors all the way up to homicides. I represent folks that are facing the death penalty. I represent folks that are currently on death row. And I represent a lot of kids both in the juvenile system, as well as kids that have been charged as adults.
So you said you represent death penalty. So are you death penalty? Don't you have to be like death penalty certified or something to do death penalty cases? So you're.
Yes, you do. There's a formula under Florida law. I am what's called penalty phase qualified, meaning I can represent folks in the penalty phase of death penalty trials. And so if they get convicted at trial, then the jury still has to determine whether the death penalty is appropriate in that case.
Okay.
We also currently represent a couple of folks who are back for resentencing. So they've already been sentenced to death, but the Supreme Court has ruled that their sentence was unconstitutional. And so I'm representing them on the resentencing part of that.
Okay. All right. So then that was one of the things that we were going to talk about. And since you brought it up, we can just start there. There's a particular order or formula on how we should speak. So you're on the defense side of all of this right now. And as state attorney, would you seek the death penalty in cases?
No. The death penalty is a medieval institution that should be thrown in the dustbins of history. It is advertised as being for the worst of the worst, but it's not about the worst of the worst. In fact, it has never been about the worst of the worst. It's about race, it's about poverty, and it's about mental illness. And it's dying across the country. Only 3% of counties in the United States right now still regularly seek the death penalty, and Broward County is one of those counties. It is extraordinarily more expensive than a life sentence would be, and it doesn't deter. All the research suggests that, in fact, homicide rates are a tick higher in states with the death penalty than in those without it. But beyond all that, to me, it's very much a moral issue. It's as Brian Stevenson says, the question for me is not whether somebody deserves to die, but whether we deserve to kill. And I am an imperfect person. My government is certainly an imperfect person. Is certainly imperfect. Florida leads the nation in death row exonerations at 29.
And Broward County leads the state, I believe.
Broward County leads the state at 11. And so there is just no redeeming quality to it anymore.
And I think in one of the instances, if I'm correct, is that one of the people that Broward County has since the death row had since been exonerated, but death penalty had already been, he was already sentenced to death. He was already put to death, and they found out through DNA evidence that he was in fact not guilty of the crime that he was charged with. And that's the thing, you can't come back from that. Like, even if there was a mistake made, if the person's already put to death, there's no coming back.
Yeah, I think he died of I know who you're talking about. I think he died of natural causes while he was on death row.
Exactly, that's right. That's
but yeah.
To me. Yeah. But I mean, he ended up, losing his life and not getting out of jail. And, he could have, spent some of that time with his family. But you're right. That's exactly right. He did die. I think he had cancer or something to that effect, right? All right. So you're not going to seek the death penalty at all, no matter how egregious the case is?
So to me, correct. The death penalty, like you say, there is no coming back from it. And it doesn't give victims any justice. These cases drag on for decades. I read a study a couple years ago where they asked a bunch of victims' families after the person had been executed how they felt. And the number one answer was, I'm just glad it's over. Because these families are just dragged through appeal after appeal. They have to go through hearing after hearing and testify over and over again. Whereas if we just get them a life sentence, at the front end, it's over. And the person that committed the crime dies alone in their cell many, many years from then, with a whisper instead of with a bang.
Okay. And we'll talk a little bit about, people that end up on death row, because you said it was an issue of like race and class and poverty and all of that. So we'll get into that. Another one of the things that Broward County is popular for, at least the state attorney in Broward County was popular for, was direct filing juveniles into adult court. Is that something that a practice that you plan to continue? And if you're going to change that, what type of changes do you see making?
No, and to my knowledge, I'm the only candidate who has said I will not direct file a single child. And just for folks who are watching who aren't familiar with what that means, Florida is one of the very, very few states in the country where prosecutors have the unilateral decision to charge kids as adults. In most states, prosecutors have to go to a judge and ask for permission to direct file and prove why it's necessary to direct file. In Florida, that's not the case. They just make the decision on their own. And that has led to Florida leading the nation in kids being charged as adults for felonies. What does that mean? It means that the kid is immediately sent to an adult jail by law, housed in an adult jail with adults.
With youthful offender time sometimes though, right? Wouldn't they get like youthful offender time or not always?
So yes, there is such a thing as called the youthful offender sentence, but it's still a prison. It's just a prison that kids from 18 to 24 are eligible for. In fact, there are some kids who are direct filed who are too young for a youthful offender sentence. And then those convictions, we know that kids are neglected and abused both in juvenile facilities, but particularly in adult facilities. And then those convictions stay on those kids' lives forever. They don't get any kind of real education. They don't get any kind of rehabilitation. The adult system is not set up to rehabilitate kids at all. And they get out, and all of us are then left less safe. We've got a kid who, when he or she gets out, will have spent many, many years, sometimes in horrible, traumatic situations, not given any real skills. And then we're surprised when they turn around and commit more crimes. And then beyond all that, the racial aspects of it are really, really disturbing. So the direct file system is one of the most racially discriminatory pieces of our criminal legal system. Accounting for, the crime that was charged and whatever history the kid has, Black kids in particular, are direct filed way more than white kids for the same types of offenses.
And so I know there's a lot of talk, and one of the way I've been told that to address that is to do some implicit bias training. Okay, so what do you think if people had implicit bias training, if it was something that was a regular part of the office, would that make a difference in the numbers in terms of like the disparity in the racial breakdown of who's arrested, who's convicted, who's sentenced as adults, or anything like that? Would that make a change in the criminal justice system?
Implicit bias training is important, but it is by no means the panacea. Right? So like the revolution is not going to be a bunch of human resource trainings. And there have been some studies that have shown that even folks that go through implicit bias training, it doesn't always change their behavior, right? And so, yes, it's important. Yes, we've got to do it because I think everybody should be forced to reconcile with their own implicit biases, but we have to go way further than that if we're going to dismantle the racial disparities. Things like getting rid of the practices that are creating them, right? So direct file is one, cash bail is another. The decision to seek mandatory minimums is another. And so stop and frisk. These are practices that we know, as long as we continue to do them, we're going to have racial disparities in the system. And so the only way to get rid of the disparities is to get rid of those practices.
Okay, and so how is it, and when you say get rid of the disparities, like what is it that you plan on doing? I know that we're gonna have I shouldn't, I said that before and I shouldn't say that. We may have a new sheriff in town. We're definitely gonna have a new state attorney, and we're gonna have a new public defender. Do you think it's important for all three of those agencies to work together, or at least be on the same page in order for us to have this real criminal justice reform that the people are looking for?
So, this is not a popular answer, but for me, no, not necessarily. I have been very outspoken that I was the only candidate not to seek the police union endorsement. I swore off taking any money from police unions. And as state attorney, I'm going to have to hold police officers accountable. And I think it's really, really dangerous when you start having kind of these incestuous relationships that district attorney and state attorney's offices around the country typically have with police. What the state attorney can do, though, right, is kind of whip police into shape. And what I mean by that is, if the next state attorney goes in and says, I am no longer going to file a single case where you do stop and frisk, you're going to see stop and frisk cases disappear by police, right? Because there's no incentive anymore for them to participate in that behavior.
What about constructive possession cases? I didn't mean to interrupt you. What about constructive possession cases? Because I practice immigration law, and I have a whole bunch of clients that end up with gun charges because there was a gun in the car, and it wasn't necessarily under their seat, but because it was in the car that they don't even own, and they got charged with a constructive possession of a firearm charge. What about cases where there's no way you can make a connection with the person and that weapon?
I actually want to take a step back first and talk about pretextual vehicle stop cases.
Okay, then.
Because that's another thing that we have pledged. We will not prosecute pretextual vehicle stop cases. And those are cases, as you know, where cops are just going around pulling people over that look suspicious and then finding an excuse to search the car.
But what if the tint's really dark, though? What if they got the real tints and they don't have that light on their license plate, and the music's real loud and they're a nuisance? What if that's the reason the police officer pulled the car over? Does that make a difference?
No, it doesn't. I mean, look, to me, it can't be a pretext. And we know that police officers every day are pulling folks over, saying it's for one reason, but when and they're open about it, and then using that reason to then go in and search the car. Look, if cops are doing enforcement operations where they are looking for tags that are expired over 6 months, go do it. That's important. I don't want to have to criminally prosecute those things, but we do need to get those things fixed. But when you take the next step and use that as an excuse to harass the individual, search the car, we're not going to participate in that.
Okay. All right. So the pretext stops once they come in. You're not going to prosecute them, even though there might have been a gun charge that's associated with it. And you think by doing that, you can change the behavior of law enforcement, is refusing to file certain types of cases.
Oh, I know we can. That's what has happened in a number of other jurisdictions where progressive prosecutors have gone in. They've changed the way that prosecution was done, and then police behavior followed suit because there's no longer an incentive for them to be harassing folks that way.
Okay, and then the other example that I typically give is the homeless guy that's on the park bench that gets arrested and his bond is like $25. What are you gonna tell how are you gonna handle those type of cases? What are you gonna do if the police officer brings some homeless guy that was sleeping on the park bench into court? Yeah, that's another thing that tends to happen.
Yes, and this is, you've really touched on two issues here. One is cash bail, one is the criminalization of poverty. I'll talk about the poverty part first. The misdemeanor system, the misdemeanor criminal legal system is a huge overlooked part of mass incarceration. 80% of our criminal docket is with misdemeanors. And most of those folks are poor. And so what we have said is we will not prosecute poverty-based or homelessness-based offenses, and we have a whole list of them on our website. They include things like panhandling, trespass, sleeping on the beach, things that we know that are, homelessness-based behaviors, not criminal behaviors. And what we do, and that is somewhere where I think we can and should work with law enforcement agencies and more importantly, our communities, is invest more heavily in other resources outside the criminal justice system for these types of social ills. The criminal justice system does a very, very bad job of combating a lot of our social problems, but it's the only thing that we've used so far. And so I think we need to make much more investments in our community to solve these problems better.
Okay, so let's stay on that a little bit, because one of the things that's happening is, particularly after, the killing of George Floyd, there's been a big movement about defunding the police, right? So what is your take on that? And I think I think people really want more reform as opposed to like completely defunding the police. But then there's some people that be like, no, just defund the police department and figure something else out. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that we need to be working towards a world where we're putting ourselves out of business. So we absolutely should have a vision of a world where we don't need police, we don't need prosecutors, and we don't need prison. We're so far from that world right now that we're not there yet. But I very, very strongly believe that we should be taking money, particularly from the militarization of police, from their tanks, their flash grenades, their body armor that they're wearing when they're going into folks' homes, and shifting that money toward investments in our community that actually keep us safe. Things like mental health beds, affordable housing, drug rehabilitation beds, jobs programs, after-school programs. We know that the best way, that these are the best ways to actually reduce crime and keep us safe. But we, here in Broward County, the Broward Sheriff's Office has a budget of $980 million. Just think of
incredible.
And that's just one of our law enforcement agencies, right? And that's per year. Just think of what we could do with 5 or 10% of that. With real investments in our community.
Right, we can find.
So I'm a big proponent of whatever you want to call it. Defund the police, reinvest police funds. There's a much, much better use of that money. And just while we're on that topic, also Broward Sheriff's Office, we have 4 jails here in Broward County. 86% of the people that are in jail have not been convicted of a crime, and most of those are there because they can't afford their bail. When we eliminate cash bail, we're going to be able to save a ton of money on local jail costs. And just think of what we could do with those funds as well.
So for people who don't understand what you mean by like you're gonna get rid of cash bail, explain that a little bit. So that means if someone gets arrested, they're gonna just be like, they're gonna do a first appearance and like the judge be like bye-bye or something like that. What do you mean like get rid of cash bail?
Yeah, so if your loved one is arrested tonight, he or she will be brought to first appearance court tomorrow morning, and the judge, in most cases, not all, but in most, will set a dollar amount that you or your family will have to come up with to get them out of jail.
Sometimes the police set the bond amount too, right? So like if depending on what you got arrested for, like when you get arrested, a police officer tells you a bond amount, because some people bond out before they even go to court that in the morning, right?
So the police don't set it. That's through what's called the standard bond agreement, where the state attorney's office and the judges have agreed to a standard bond for a number of crimes.
Okay.
And it is profoundly, it is again very unjust, because if you can't afford that standard bond amount, you sit in jail, whereas somebody else who has more money gets to get out right away.
Exactly.
But so they set that dollar amount, and for folks who can afford it, they can get out, fight their case. For folks who can't, they have to sit in jail months, sometimes years before their case goes to trial or is pled out. This is the very definition of two systems of justice. Even for families that can afford to post the bail, that drives them deeper into poverty, right? And we actually know that Black women bear the economic brunt of cash bail the most. And when you are when you are in a decision of, do I pay my rent this month or do I bail my loved one out of jail? Do I sell my car, which I need to go to work, or do I let my loved one sit in jail?
Even worse, they go and get one of those cash advances for like $500
Yeah.
or something, and then it takes them like 5 years to pay it back, and
Yep.
they end up paying like hundreds of, like over 1,000% in interest and doing that. So that's another one of those things that keep them in a vicious cycle. They go get the money that they don't have, and they continuously have to pay it back and pay it back and pay it back, right. Which is another thing that happens.
So what we say is that your personal finances should never determine whether you get out of jail. The only thing that should determine whether you get out of jail or your pretrial release conditions are your level of dangerousness to the community. What that means is, yes, most folks who don't present a danger, all folks who don't present a danger to the community, they're going to be given a court date, they're going to be ROR'd, and they're going to be told to come back. And only for those folks that we can prove present some sort of danger to the community do we then start talking about either conditions of their release or, in extreme cases, pretrial detention. In places where they have reduced or eliminated cash bail, and this is really, really important, because the pro-cash bail people will tell you that if you don't have bail, then there's no way to guarantee that they come back to court. But study after study has shown that in places where they've reduced or eliminated it, it has had no impact on whether folks come to court or not. Because in the vast majority of cases, the threat of a warrant hanging over your head is much more of an inconvenience and much more scary to folks than losing whatever
money that
than losing their bail amount, especially since they're not going to get that money back. For most folks, aren't going to get that money back anyways because they went through a bail bond.
Yes, exactly, right? Exactly.
And so not only does bail not do anything to coerce people to come back to court, but there's some evidence out of New Jersey where they eliminated cash bail that has actually led to a decrease in low-level arrests. Whether that is because it's an actual decrease in crime or police are deciding not to do it because there isn't the cash bail there, that's a good thing. And so there's no redeeming qualities to cash bail. And so we are committed to ending it.
Okay, so what type of crimes would be eligible for cash bail? Does it matter what the person did or who they are? Like, what is it that you're using to determine whether or not someone would have to post a bail or not to get out of jail?
No. We're saying that we will never seek cash bail, ever, period. For cases in which the person presents a danger to the community, and I can think of robbery, for example, or burglary, or domestic violence cases. Then we start talking about what are called pretrial release conditions. So maybe we put them on house arrest, maybe we put them on an ankle monitor, maybe we just make them call in a couple times a week, and so that we can protect the community while at the same time keeping these folks out. For your really, really serious cases, those folks aren't getting bail now, and they're being held pretrial now. Cases like murder, sexual battery, those folks are being held in pretrial detention without a bail now, and in those extreme cases would continue to do so when I'm state attorney.
Okay, so let's run through some charges. Marijuana. Are you going to continue to prosecute marijuana crime? I know they're not going to have a bond, so no cash bail for a marijuana arrest. But are you going to prosecute marijuana cases?
No, and not in any amount. So
Any amount, even a felonious
some
amount?
of my opponents have said, you know, we need to stop prosecuting low-level marijuana. Look, the coffee that I drank this morning and the glass of wine that I'm going to have for dinner tonight are worse for me than marijuana ever would be. And it is, to me, it is both profoundly immoral to lock somebody up for marijuana, and it's also dangerous.
Some people are getting rich, particularly since some people are getting rich from marijuana right now. You know, it's not fair. One person's going to jail and getting their life all messed up, losing their job and everything else, and then other people are becoming millionaire with the same substance. So there is some
exactly
in that. Okay. All right. So buy-in. How are you going to get the people in the office to buy into these changes that you want to make when you become, if and when you become the next state attorney?
Well, we're not going to get everybody to buy in, and I think there is going to be a bit of cleaning house that's going to need to be done, not in a malicious way, but just in a, you know, folks that have been there for years and years who have one type of philosophy are not going to fit well in our administration. There are a ton of really good prosecutors there who want to do the right thing, who I think are really excited about this type of prosecutor's office. And then we've got to do a really good job of recruiting, of national recruiting, of bringing young law graduates who envision themselves as civil rights lawyers and bring them to the office to do civil rights work.
And what are you going to do? Salary is another thing that that people are concerned about. So what can you do about salaries, and how can you keep more experienced attorneys to stay in the office?
Yeah. So the budget that was passed yesterday actually included a pretty significant salary bump for state employees, which is a good thing. I think it's a misnomer or the idea that folks have left the prosecutor's office because of money. I just don't think is true. I think it's true in a very few. I think it's true in a very few cases. But if we give folks who are passionate about this type of work a real purpose and excitement to do it, they're going to stay. We can lobby the legislature, get as much money as we possibly can. We're never going to be able to compete with private practice. We just never will. And so we have to provide. So we have to provide something different, and that different is, if you want to do civil rights work and really help your community, this is the best place to do it.
Okay, so does that mean that you'll lobby to try to get their money, or you think the salary?
Of course, we will aggressively lobby to try to bring in more salary in order to keep more experienced folks. But like I said, no matter how much we get, we're never going to be able to compete with a private practice. We've got to offer something better and something different.
Another incentive. So, it could be just, work-life balance, the culture of the office or something like that. They're happy about going to work every day and the good work that they do. All right. So actually,
the number one, in study after study of workers, the number one thing that they say that keeps them happy is not salary. It's purpose. It's folks that feel like they are living their purpose within their employment. And I think that's something that we can offer that hasn't been offered before.
Right. It's so funny. I actually had an interview for a job like right before I got on this call with you. And the first thing the guy tells me is that they work from 8 to 7 every day and 2 weekends out of a month. I was like, what? The conversation lasted like 7 minutes, right? And he said, I don't think it's a good fit. I was like, I think work-life balance is important, and you can't have people working that many hours a day. Their brain is going to be scrambled by the time they leave. Like, why do you want to have a culture like that in the office? He literally was on the phone with me for 7 minutes and we had to hang up. He said, this is not the place for you. I'm like, it's okay. It's not the place for you. I'm not committing to work 8 to 7 every day and 2 weekends out of the month. That's just crazy. I shouldn't say that's crazy, because some people, they love that. That's what they want to do, but that's just not for me. is what I should say. That is not for me. All right, so we talked about marijuana cash bond. We talked about the death penalty. You're gonna try to get the people more money. Let's talk about immigration, right? And there's a couple different ways we can talk about that. I have a client, and then part of the reason why I want to talk about it is because South Florida, Broward County is very multicultural. You have a lot of people from the Caribbean. You have a lot of people from South and Central America. And I have a client right now who's looking at getting deported for a child abuse no harm case, right? And he grew up getting beat. My parents used to beat me too, you know what I mean? But it's one of those things that didn't transition well for people that came to the United States, because a lot of them didn't know that you can't spank your children, right? And so he did this, and now he got a felony conviction, and now he's looking at getting deported and being separated from his family. What could you do in that situation? And what would you train your prosecutors to do when a person may have an immigration consequence that can completely separate their family? Or is there anything that you can do about that?
Oh, of course. Yeah, so we've actually committed to creating a special unit within the office specifically to protect our immigrant communities. And one of their jobs is to make sure that we limit the immigration consequences from our criminal cases as much as possible. I don't know anything about your client's case. If your client did it, he or she should be held accountable in some way, but he or she shouldn't be held accountable more so than citizens. And that's what our existing kind of immigration law does, is it could make them deportable. It could make them no longer be able to re-enter. It could make them immediately be actually deported. And so what we have to do as prosecutors is, as you know, craft both charges and resolutions in ways that doesn't result in those types of immigration consequences. And you can do that and still get all of the same accountability that you would otherwise want for anybody else without the immigration consequences. It just takes a little bit more creativity. Okay. And most of that has to do with the charging decision. With deciding precisely what to charge with in a way that doesn't make the person deportable.
Yes, we're going to come back to that. So there's actually two questions that people are asking, and I want to go ahead and be respectful and ask the question. And one of them is about things that you kind of talked about already. One of them was the salary question. They're asking whether or not you would consider maybe like a loan forgiveness as an incentive to allow people who may want to stay in the office longer. Because I think if you work for the federal government, they do something where they pay like 10% of the loan or something like that. So would that be something the state attorney would be able to offer to allow people to stay in the office longer?
So the state attorney doesn't have that authority to do that. I will say there is loan forgiveness already out there. I'm in a loan forgiveness program. If you complete 10 years of public service and you make 120 on-time payments, your loans are supposed to be forgiven. Now, there have been all kinds of problems with that with the federal government. And so that's something that, as a state agency in the public sector, we can do. And we should expand that at the state level for sure. But that's something that the legislature needs to take up. It's not something that the state attorney has control over.
Oh, okay. So the other question is what do you say to people who think you are too progressive and many things you say you will do is not realistic?
Well,
I'll
take the first part first.
Okay.
The criminal legal system that we have now doesn't work. It hasn't kept you safe. We have for 40 years been taught that the only way to keep folks safe is to lock more and more people up, get more and more convictions. What we have found is that has made us profoundly less safe. Folks with criminal convictions, it's much more difficult for them to get jobs, get housing, get public assistance. And when you become desperate, you commit more crimes. When folks go to prison, they come back extraordinarily traumatized without any real skills and commit more crimes. What we offer is a profound rethinking of that system, that we can make diversion the rule, not the exception, keep convictions off folks' records, and actually address the underlying cause of crime. Things like poverty, mental illness, drug addiction. We develop structured diversion programs that combat those things so that we can actually reduce crime in the long run. And as to the whether we can get it done, it's already being done across the country. District attorney and state attorney's offices are doing these things.
We're in the
just
South.
in the last 4 years, we've
We're
seen
in the South. I don't mean to interrupt you, but we're in the South. Like people, you know, we live in South Florida and people think like we're not in a Southern state. We're in the South. I know the things you're talking about is not happening in the South. How do you get
well, look,
live in the South to agree to this stuff?
Well, look, the prosecutor decides whether to seek cash bail.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't care how many racists there are around Florida, they don't get to decide. Once the state attorney's in there, he or she is in there, that person gets to decide. The state attorney gets to decide whether to seek mandatory minimums, whether to charge possession cases. And so, you know, I certainly recognize our, you know, where we are, but I think that's a real opportunity. I mean, what if we get a truly decarceral progressive state attorney who succeeds in the South? Just think of that, what that will mean for criminal justice around.
It does mean a lot. Ayala tried that in Orlando and they took her death penalty cases away from her. She said, I'm not seeking a death penalty. They're like, oh, you're not okay. And they took the cases from her. So
they did, and we've learned from that. Look, she was a trailblazer. She's
not even running for re-election. She's like,
took extraordinary courage.
Mm-hmm.
We've learned from that, and also she's done a lot of really good stuff with the war on drugs, with cash bail. So she has been successful. I think we need to take it, you know, much further.
Further than that, yes. And there's actually a young lady, Monique World, that's running election. She's a fellow Gator. And so if anybody in the Orlando area is hearing this, you know, go ahead and like vote for her. Shout out to University of Florida Gators on that. That was shameful. I know it was absolutely.
That's okay.
What I just did. Okay, so we talked about we're talking about cash bail. What about, so the other thing now, because we talked a little bit about defunding the police officer, call it reform, whatever you want, is progressive. What are we going to do about these police officers that are doing things and the people feel like they're getting away with it? I mean, law enforcement see it a different way, and I mean, even as an attorney, you know, when I'm talking to someone, they're like, but what? You know, I saw the video. You know, but attorneys know that, you know, it's a lot more to just seeing a video sometimes, right? I think the last video we saw, it shouldn't be more than just seeing the video. But what is your what are you gonna do, and how are you gonna deal with cases where it becomes necessary to prosecute a police officer?
So two parts of that. One, yes, we must absolutely be much more aggressive in prosecuting police. If videos come out of any other people doing what police do, they're arrested immediately. And then there is subsequent follow-up investigation, as there should be. If I had seen if I was the state attorney on the George Floyd case, I would have sought arrest warrants immediately. I then would have sought search warrants for their homes, their computers, their phones. I would have talked to their coworkers. I would have pulled their IA complaints. You know, doing those things to try to find a pattern to see what the ultimate appropriate charge should be. But we've got to stop treating police officers differently than we do ordinary citizens.
But they have a big
and so
right.
We actually have a really long plan on our website on how to do that. One is we need to appoint independent prosecutors who are either former public defenders or civil rights lawyers who are outside the conflicts of interest that exist within the prosecutor's office in order to aggressively prosecute cops. But then we also need to dismantle the systems and practices that create police brutality in the first place, right? And so things, again, like stop and frisk, things like protectional vehicle stops, things like we still allow police officers to walk around without body cameras. And about half of our agencies here in Broward County don't have body cameras. And so it's not enough to just be really, really aggressive in prosecuting police. We've got to force police to shape up and rethink the way that they do policing, because right now in many, many neighborhoods, the only interactions that folks are having with police are negative. And they're having it because they're getting stopped when they're riding their bike in their own neighborhood, or they're patted down while they're standing outside the corner store or their house. We have to end those type of practices if we're going to really end police brutality.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was trying to interrupt you, but I shouldn't have, because I should have just taken a note and say it later. But the police officers, they have their own Bill of Rights, right? So police officers have, when they do something or commit some crime, they have, I don't want to say more or less rights than people, but they have their own police Bill of Rights. So their cases are handled differently. You can't just go and talk to the police officer like you can like some other person. I think they also have a right, like if you're going to try to make a case against them, especially like internal affairs, they get access to the information before someone's questioned them. So like, how would the state attorney deal with that? What about that?
So whatever Bill of Rights they have, that exists within the disciplinary structures of their departments. It has zero impact on whether they're charged with a crime. And so one of the things that we've said is we're going to create an investigatory unit that citizens can come to with complaints and do investigations ourselves. Because as you know, far too often, folks who have complaints against police officers are forced to go to the very department where the police officer works in order to file an IA complaint. And look, there are some very good IA divisions. There are some very bad IA divisions. But if my loved one was beaten by police, I would not trust that police department to fully investigate at all. And so what we need is a separate entity, right? And that entity can be the state attorney's office.
Yes, and also I think even like police officers, when they're watching a cop that might be using too much force, they're afraid to complain on the police officer because they're going to get some pushback or blowback from other officers. That's very important. The other thing, conviction integrity unit. There's a lot of changes that you want to make in terms of like with the marijuana and some of these. What about somebody that was, maybe was convicted before in the state attorney's office? Are you willing to go look at old cases? Or like if some police officer has a whole bunch of complaints and, it turns, there was a problem, would you be willing to or set up a unit in the office that would look at these old cases to see if like maybe something shady happened and this person probably shouldn't have been convicted? Or would you, and the other thing, are you willing to vacate all the marijuana, misdemeanor marijuana cases that went in through the state attorney's office that's preventing people from, moving forward with their life because they have a drug conviction?
Yes, absolutely. We've got to be aggressive in vacating all of the prior marijuana convictions. As to conviction integrity, I announced that I was running for state attorney in March of last year, 2019. At the time, the state attorney's office did not have a conviction review unit. And one of my main points that I was immediately shouting from the top of my lungs is, we need a conviction review unit. In about 4 months, the state attorney's office announced that they were creating one, and it's been up and running since the end of the year. Excuse me. The woman who's running it is doing a good job. They have vacated the conviction of one person. It's not enough.
Only?
Yeah, just one person since it got set up. We need a unit that is fully staffed, fully funded, with investigators, and full of folks who have criminal defense experience so they know what to look for, right? There are 96,000 people plus in our Florida state's prisons. Conservative estimates put between 2 and 8% of those who are innocent. That's thousands of people, right? And so I think we can be really, really aggressive there. But even more, I think, important, or even somewhere else where we can have more of an impact, is with a sentence review unit. Because to me, it is just as unjust for somebody to be sitting in prison for decades for something that they did, in their 20s that was nonviolent or that was a drug case, and their life is just being wasted. And so I want to go back, create a sentence review unit that reviews our long sentences that have been doled out over the past 4 decades, and vacate some of those convictions where those sentences were profoundly unjust, and letting them out would not only save taxpayers money, but obviously give freedom to the person that deserves it.
Okay, and you're talking about letting people out. I'm gonna ask another question. All right, so with this COVID situation that's going on right now, right? People are still getting arrested every day. They're still putting people in jail. And then you talked about the people who are can't afford to bond out, so they're still in jail. If you win and you take office, I think January 2021, are you willing to like look at the people that are in, review the cases of the people that are in jail and see if there's a way to release them while they're pending trial?
Of course. I mean, of course, yes. I mean, that's part of our platform, and maybe the easiest way to do that is just to eliminate their cash bail. It's just a move to say we don't want bail on these cases, and I think that would release a whole lot of folks who pose no danger to our community, and in fact can get back to work, back to their families, to provide for the community.
So are you taking money from bail bondsmen? Because I don't think they like you right now. Not if you're gonna get rid of cash bail.
No, we are not taking any money from bail bondsmen or police unions.
Okay. All right then. All right. So it was good talking to you. I'm gonna just make sure. Oh, the other thing. So you had you were saying that you want to expand the diversion program, which I think is a really good idea. I think reentry programs for people that were convicted of something that's important too. Did you the other thing is that there's this movement about banning the box, right? Are you familiar with that is?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you think about that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I think it's nowhere near enough, right? So like ban the boxes is when community, local governments tell their public businesses that are getting public money that you cannot ask folks if they've been convicted of a crime when they apply for a job, right? And so that's a really good thing, because we want people to get fresh starts. We want people to be able to go to work. But the collateral consequences of convictions extend far beyond just employment, right? It's the ability to get a loan, the ability to get a scholarship to go to school, the ability to buy a car, to rent an apartment. In most apartment buildings ask you if you've been convicted of something.
Yes.
Immigration consequences, fines and fees, the ability to get on public assistance, and on and on and on. And so that is one of the biggest reasons why we can't rely on criminal convictions anymore. That we have to find ways to hold folks accountable and address the underlying causes of crime without relying on convictions in jail.
Okay. The last thing I want to talk about is like, we know that there's some communities that are definitely over policed. Is the state attorney's office, do they have it now? Do they have like a program where they're reaching out to the community, they're educating people in the community? Like when I talked about the people from the Caribbean and South America, a lot of them really don't know that you cannot beat your children, right? And I know we all know as attorneys, ignorance of the law is not an excuse, but is there anything or any program, and I think it would be beneficial to go in and just educate the people. And I don't know if that could be, and I would like for that to be the responsibility of the state attorney. So, you won't have these kind of cases. Is that something that you're considering doing, or that you would do, is maybe find some way to get your attorneys more involved in the community so they can educate the people on some of the laws that they find themselves violating without even really knowing that they're violating the law? Yes,
of course. I mean, the state attorney's office is absent from our community now. I mean, we never see them except for when they're announcing some trial victory that they have won. Mm-hmm. They must be much more involved in the community and in going to schools, going to civic group meetings. But I think we need to go beyond that and give the community real power in the state attorney's office. So what we have committed to doing is creating a community board of experts from across Broward County in a variety of different areas, right? Education, addiction, faith leaders, victims' rights, medical, and bringing the very best people from around the county and giving them both real responsibilities to shape policy in the state attorney's office and real power to do so. So a perfect example might be, if we have a problem with kids breaking, 15 and 16-year-old kids breaking into cars, I don't have all the solutions to that as a prosecutor, and law enforcement certainly doesn't have the solutions to that. But experts from the community might. And so if we empower our community to be able to make real decisions and institute real policy, then not only will we be obviously more present within the community, but much more able to reduce crime in the long run.
Okay, I think I'm gonna go back to the juveniles, because you're one of the things that I see that you have a theme that we need to address the reason on why people are committing crimes and try to maybe bring some more resources. There was one of the last people I talked to. There was a case that was in Dade County. This young man, he was like 18 years old, and he was on trial for a homicide. It was like he had killed someone. But when they were talking about him, he had been getting arrested since he was like 9 years old, right? Like literally getting arrested since he was like 9 years old. And to me, I was like, I think that was a failure on society's part, right? We want every kid to have like great parents and, people that are taking care of them. But when that doesn't happen, I think we should really step in. So if a kid is getting arrested at 9, there's a lot going on, right? There's no way his life is okay, and he's getting arrested at 9 years old. So what can you do, especially in the juvenile system? Not only we only talked about direct filing, but I think there's more we can do, like in the juvenile system, to maybe start addressing these guys and girls that are going to be these adult criminals that we're going to deal with later. Because usually by the time someone's 30, they're really not, they probably like, then their days of deciding to be a criminal is probably over. So it really starts young, and it's because of just life, right? So like what would you want to do, or what kind of programs, or what can you implement in the juvenile justice system to really prevent these people from making it into adult court at any point in their life?
Well, the first step is to recognize that the juvenile justice system now is doing far more harm than good. And we need to keep the juvenile justice system out of as many kids' lives as possible.
Elaborate on how we can do that. How can you do that?
Yeah, so it means working strenuously within our schools and in our communities to create safe spaces for kids, because we know that kids that are committing crimes are doing so because they don't feel safe. Kids that are committing crimes, 90%, which is a huge number, 90% of kids that end up in detention suffered some sort of extreme trauma as a kid, right? Our system isn't addressing trauma, but if we invested resources in real trauma therapy for kids, instead of just putting handcuffs on them and shuffling them to the detention center, then we can actually combat, right, the underlying cause of the crime. And so, it means, again, making diversion the rule, not the exception, particularly for kids, right? So if a kid is out stealing or breaking into cars, maybe the reason for that is because there's a bad family life. Maybe the reason for that is because they're mentally ill. Maybe the reason for that is because they're poor and trying to bring money home. Each kid is different, but we can develop diversion programs that are individual to that kid that can address those issues there. And we're not always going to be perfect, but our juvenile justice system is certainly not perfect right now and is doing far more harm than good.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's all. I thought of something and then it kind of like slipped my mind. But I definitely think there are some really great ideas that you want to bring to the office. So let people know how they can get in touch with you, how they can donate, how they can volunteer for your campaign, and when your election is.
Sure. The election is August 18th, 2020. You have to be a registered Democrat in Broward County in order to vote in the election. And you have to be a registered Democrat to vote for most of the elections that are going on the 18th. Our website is www.joekimok.com. You can sign up to volunteer. You can donate. Follow us on Facebook. We have a social media program that is far beyond, I think, any other candidate for any office in Broward County.
I agree.
We're really, really intentional about providing not just good content, but content, not just engaging content, but content that's educational, that lets folks know about everything that's going on kind of within the system. If you're not registered to vote, you got to register by July 20th.
Okay, and someone wanted to know what schools you went to.
I went to Florida State University for undergrad. I graduated magna cum laude with a degree in criminology and English lit. I was a teacher for 3 years through Teach for America at a low-income inner-city school in Houston. And then I went to Vanderbilt University Law School in Nashville.
All right, then. So that's it. So Joe Kimok, he's going to be the progressive state attorney. His election is August 18th, 2020, and you have to be a registered Democrat. And one of the people in the webinar said, who knows, or something like that. She giving me went to Florida State. So thank you so much for talking to me. And I totally agree with all the things that you want to do, especially with the juvenile justice system and cash bail. And you really do have some really progressive ideas. And I really encourage the people to read more, go to your website, check you out on social media. And Joe Kimok, state attorney, August 18, 2020. And then we have to tell people to request their mail-in ballot, right? Because you want to do vote by mail. We have a COVID situation going on. And just in case on August 18th or during early voting, the numbers skyrocket again, you request your mail-in ballot and you can vote by mail, and don't worry about it because you can track that they received it. You can track that your vote is counted, but you have to request that ballot and return it in before the July 20th, 2020 date. But the primary election is August 18, 2020. And just sign us off because I kind of want you to have the last word.
Thanks. Look, we're going through a really profound moment in our history right now where folks are rightfully screaming with rage and pain about the status of our system. We should listen to them. They're not screaming that they want our elected officials to get along better, that they want politicians to be taking over. They're screaming that they want to dismantle the whole system. And that's what we offer. And so I thank you for the opportunity to be on here. It was really an honor and a privilege to speak with you.
No, thank you very much for taking your time out and speaking to me. I appreciate it. All right. Have a good day.
You
Bye-bye.
too.